welcome everyone. We were going to say, ask if you have any specific challenges like we have on the screen right now about your child's challenges, about your child's anxiety. You're hoping that they cover tonight. Please ask in the chat or in the comments under the live stream on Facebook. We want to welcome everybody tonight for this family chat. We had a lot of interest, so we are thrilled to have all of you join us. Have an excellent speaker tonight, as well as excellent panelists. The family chats are brought to you by parents and professionals, and they're sponsored by Home and Community Positive Behavior Support, Partnerships for People with Disabilities, Berman Autism Center, and Positive Behavior Support, and Parent-to-Parent USA. And some of our panelists are Molly Dellinger-Ray from Home and Community Positive Behavior Support, and she's also here from Partnering for People with Disabilities. We also have Marcia that's going to be helping us facilitate questions from you all from Parent to Parent USA. And Laura Kern is also from Home and Community Positive Behavior Support. And she's also helping us tonight. She's going to be a speaker, and she's also has her son is here. And Lauren Moskowitz is joining us. She is the speaker tonight, and she is going to share with us all of her knowledge. So can't wait to get going on that. Ryan is here. He is a peer mentor, and they're going to all introduce themselves. And Laura, I already mentioned, but go ahead, Lauren, please take it away and go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm a faculty member. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm a faculty member in the psych department at St. John's in Queens, New York. I have been working with kids on the spectrum and with developmental disabilities for, I guess, over almost 25 years now. And what else about myself? I have two daughters, a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old, who I'll probably end up talking about a lot. And yeah, I guess that's it for me. Laura?
Hi, I'm Laura Kern. I'm a professor at University of South Florida. I came into special education and that whole area because when my son was born, Ryan, he ended up getting eventually diagnosed with disabilities, and he can disclose or not what they are. It's up to him now. I have to learn that because now he's 20 and like he has to make some of these decisions. But he and I started like a lifelong journey of learning together. And I learned a little bit about the academics, but he's taught me like what works and what doesn't work. So we're hoping that one of the things we do deal with is anxiety. So hopefully that we can give a little perspective on that. Ryan, you want to add anything?
Yeah, really, I think my goal is basically to help those, especially since I was suffering from extreme anxiety for most of my life, to sort of help those whose parents are, struggling with their kid and not knowing why is he so anxious about this thing. It definitely is definitely is necessary for parents to understand, why does my son feel this way, or why does my daughter feel this way? Because sometimes you just don't know until they tell you. They might just be anxious about something you might see as minute, and you need to know fully what it is.
Okay, well, great. Well, we can't thank you all enough for sharing with us tonight and sharing with everyone that's in attendance. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, Lauren, so you can take over and start the presentation. But I wanted to just say thank you all for being here tonight. I'm really excited to get going on this. Did I stop?
Sure. Can you see my slides? I shared these in the chat. Hopefully people were able to see those. These are much shortened from a longer talk that we gave, Laura and Ryan and I gave back in May. And so I put the link for that longer talk in there, but this is going to be more interactive. This is more of a chat. That was more of a, formal presentation or webinar. So we'll just try to get through a few slides. Feel free to interrupt me. But, we thought it would be helpful just to present a few slides for some background on anxiety. So what I do is something called cognitive behavioral therapy. Originally, I was trained in ABA, applied behavior analysis, and then I studied with one of the founders of what's called positive behavior support, Ted Carr, which was really kind of rooted in ABA, but well, I could go on. I won't go into the differences, but that was my background. And then I started learning how to integrate thoughts and feelings really into behaviors. So what CBT is just talking about addressing the thoughts you're thinking and the feelings you're feeling and the behaviors, because they all interact, right? Especially when it becomes to anxiety, right? So like, if you're afraid of something, you're probably thinking a lot of anxious thoughts, right? Like the spider's going to bite me, or I'm going to fail the test, or no one's going to like me, whatever it is, right? You're feeling anxious feelings, like your heart's beating fast or your stomach hurts, and you're engaging in anxious behaviors, like maybe running away or hiding or reassurance seeking questions, right? There's tons of different variations of these, but they all kind of interact with each other is the point. And so what we do is try to address all those different components. This is the treatment approach, we take when we're working with either, neurotypical kids or kids on the spectrum or with other developmental disabilities as well. So what I'll do is I'll just give a really brief overview of the way we treat it in general, whether it's neurotypical kids or adults, and then the ways in which we would modify it for kids with autism and other special needs. Okay. And like I said, feel free to interrupt, please. The first thing we do is, in the psychology world, it's called psychoeducation, a fancy jargony term for just, educating kids or adults about what anxiety is, because, that can help demystify it and make it less scary. That FDR quote, like fear of fear itself, right? That's what anxiety really is. It's being afraid of fear itself, being afraid of those feelings, feeling like you can't cope with being afraid. When in reality, being afraid is just part of life, and we all deal with it. We all cope with it. And so not being as afraid of fear is really the goal, right? So a big thing we do when we're working with kids or adults is really just try to explain anxiety has a function or a purpose. It's evolutionarily designed to protect us, right? You would never study for a test, I assume, if you felt no anxiety at all, right? Or you wouldn't run from a lion if fear or anxiety didn't motivate you at all. So, it's there for a reason. And the problem with a lot of people who suffer from anxiety disorders is that it's too much of it is there, right? And maybe it comes up in not the most helpful times, right? Like it's helpful if you're running from a lion, but it's not so helpful in maybe other aspects of your life, right? So we talk about that your body is designed to have this fear alarm, like a fire alarm, but that maybe your fear alarm is a little oversensitive and it's going off when there's burnt toast, right? Instead of a actual fire. So these are the ways in which we explain it to kids. With kids with autism, I tend to try to explain it as visually as possible with social stories or with a lot of pictures. The other thing we try to do is externalize anxiety. And what that means is give it a name, like give it a name of usually a villain. Like if you're a Star Wars fan, Darth Vader, or my older daughter, when she was younger, we called her Maleficent, and the name for anxiety. So just giving it a name. And that way you can align with your child against that anxiety, instead of feeling like, you're butting heads with your child and fighting your child. Then it's you and your child on the same team trying to fight your anxiety. So it's like a big thing we try to do. And we explain the goal of treatment, which is really learning to face your fears and cope with your fears and just not make it go away. But, we all have to kind of live with anxiety in some ways throughout our life, but learning how to cope with it or tolerate it, right?
I'd like to add something real
Yeah.
quick. If you go back, is that I think an important one is that when you're younger, it's good to label anxiety as a villain, but when you're older, I see it more as a friend. Anxiety is your friend. You have to get used to it. It's sort of like that your sort of roommate in college, he has some benefits, he has some downsides. And you take the benefits and the downsides. Without it, you would be in a much worse place, but you might have too much of it. You need to learn how to back off and how to get away.
I love that, Ryan. That's such a great analogy. I love that.
Hey, Lauren.
Yeah.
I have a couple people telling their stories in the chat box, and I won't totally go into that, but at some point in time in the presentation, will you give a couple of maybe resources on books or things to help with this? Okay, great.
Yeah, I think the last slide on here is resources, maybe, that I shared, and I shared the slides in the chat, but I think the last slide is resources, and I think there's
good to know.
Yeah, but if there's not, if I forgot, if there's not, I'll definitely give some books, for sure.
I did
Okay.
want to add one thing
Yeah.
before we go on, just like from a little parent perspective. Um, anxiety was something that like we never talked about, and we were dealing with so many other parts of the disability of
Right.
like, making sure Ryan was doing well in school, etc. That when we started realizing that there was also his brain was whirling or fixating on something and it was getting to anxiety, that was really hard as a parent for me to be like, oh my gosh, now there's another thing. Like, we got everything else under control. He's in class, he's learning. And like, now you're going to throw me another loop. And I think that was really hard because it was our third diagnosis. So it was like, oh my gosh, now you slam me with this one. So that was just we had to go through kind of an acceptance, just like we had to for the original disabilities. It was like a trifecta. And then we could then think about what are we going to do about it and treat it not as like pushing us over the edge, but like, okay, it's just another aspect of how the disability is showing and how it is. So, but that was hard because that was again, like I thought we were in control, we were on the right path. And then I was like, oh my gosh, okay, we got slammed again.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think that's also why, we don't talk a lot about cure in our world, right? Like it's not about curing autism, it's about living with it, seeing its strengths, capitalizing on it, right? And same thing with anxiety. I think I was anxious my whole life. That's what drew me to the study of it for sure. And I think probably most people are, and when they study something, it's, because of something they went through in their own lives. So I think that has given me this perspective. And what made me start realizing as I was working with kids with autism 20 years ago, wow, they're really anxious. A lot of them are really suffering from anxiety. So yeah, I think that that's, such a helpful perspective. Just a quick note, if someone was asking the chat to reshare the slides, and I don't think I'm able to do it because I'm in maybe,
Presenter mode. That's
yeah.
okay, Lauren. Molly's
Yeah.
going to resend them here
Oh,
shortly.
great. Thank you, Molly. Okay, great. All right. The other big thing we do is try to reframe our thoughts or think about things in a different way. In the psychology field and CBT, we call that cognitive restructuring. This has its limits. For some people, this is super helpful and it's tricky because for me, when my friends do this for me who are psychologists, it can feel invalidating at times, right? Because we're not trying to deny the reality of like life is really hard. But it's about how can we try to think about this in a more helpful way that just really helps us to be able to do things that are hard for us, basically, right? So some challenging anxious thoughts is just, like if, one of my kids who thought a spider was going to bite her all the time, she was going to die, do I know for certain that's going to happen? Has that ever happened before? What's the worst thing that could happen? Helping ask questions to challenge that. Another example that I think I probably gave in the longer family chat, but it's one of my favorites is a girl I mean, a lot of my kids are afraid of doing badly in school, but one girl I worked with who was, I think, 14 or 15, she was really afraid that if she failed a test, she would fail out of high school and then she would never get into college and then she would never be able to get a job and she'd wind up becoming a stripper. So that's the kind of things we see a lot with anxiety. Like it really snowballs. We call that catastrophizing. It's not just like a little worry, like, oh, I'm going to fail this test, but it's like, I will never get a job and I'll be a stripper. It's like really go into the max there, right? And that's what most of the kids I work with really kind of suffer from. So really trying to help them think, and I think this is where, as a parent, sometimes our natural instinct is to reassure our children and be like, you're not going to fail the test. You're not going to fail the test, right? We don't want to do that. Instead, you want to, because the reality is your kid could fail the test, right? With people with anxiety, they want certainty. And the scary part of life is there is no certainty. Everything is uncertain, right? So we have to help them tolerate that uncertainty. Like, did you study well? Did you study for the test? Yeah. So how likely is it that you'll fail? Probably not very likely. Have you ever failed a test before? No, so it's not very likely that you fail. Is it possible? Sure. And you can cope with that. If the worst happens, how would you cope with that? Right. So really trying to help people realize that, yeah, life is full of a lot of bad things. We could just drive a car and get an accident. Sorry, not to be morbid, but it's true. We all live with risk every day in our lives, everything we're doing. And just being able to focus on, what is it we want to do with our lives is usually what we try to focus kids and adults on, if that
I
makes
think I want to add as well that it's very good, especially with kids with autism. It's especially good because a lot of the time their brain, I learned it as for a while. It's called rock brain, where their brain sort of gets stuck on one thing. They hyperfixate on this one thing.
Totally.
No, if you just answer sometimes, sometimes it doesn't work. You have to answer very bluntly. But other times you can answer it where, okay, you failed the test. What's the worst that happens? That's
Yeah.
not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And because especially someone with autism, I can't speak for everyone, but if they go over this list, those lists to you may seem like nothing, but for them, they're real possibilities, and you got to go through them being like, this will never happen. This won't happen. You're not, and sort of that actually helped. I remember I've done that for years. Remember, my mom would talk to me about, I'm about to fail a test, and she would then go on and be like, are you really gonna fail? What happens if you do fail? Is it really that big of a deal? And most of the time, I'm like, no, why am I worried about this? And
Yeah.
then suddenly you feel like, why was I worried about this? And you feel stupid for worrying about it. And you're like, oh, it was nothing.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times, the best way for, especially with severe anxiety, is to eventually just realize how sometimes it's not worth it, how it's just over like generalized fear.
Right. Totally. With a lot of kids, that kind of cognitive reframing can be really complex, of course, and especially with a lot of the kids I work with who are nonverbal or minimally verbal. And so a lot of the time we'll just try to do more simple coping self-talk or boss back talk, like bossing back your anxiety. Like I said, giving it a name. So naming your anxiety or OCD, like I said, Darth Vader or Voldemort, and being like, you're not going to be the boss of me, Voldemort. I'm not going to let you boss around. Go jump in a lake, Voldemort. I'm going to fight my fear. I don't have to listen to you and wash my hands or whatever it is. Right. So that can be a much simpler way, rather than getting into this whole, let's think about this differently. That can be really hard for a lot of kids. So it can really help to just boss it back, say a coping thought. And we do that with little kids too, 3 and 4 year olds too.
It's
So
especially helpful with little kids because sometimes they won't understand, and you don't want to
totally.
end up wasting your time and making it worse. Trying
Right.
to tell it, oh, I could fail the test. What do you mean I could fail the test? I wasn't
Right.
thinking about failing the test. And then you're
Exactly. I
like,
would be doing that with a 5 year old.
it's
Yeah.
like you open up that whole can of worms, and
Right.
once they get older, you can go in more depth. It's sort of a thing where you have to think on their level. What can they think? That's the best way to deal with any, especially just in life in general. Thinking about how they think will help with how you do it. If you just go on their level thinking about this is what they know, what shouldn't I tell them? What can I tell them? That type of thing.
Yeah.
Definitely
Such a
helpful.
great point. Yeah. So basically though, the psychoed and the cognitive restructuring, all of that's really just in the service of the most important part, which is facing your fears, which is what we call gradual exposure. And this is the most important ingredient if you're trying to treat anxiety in neurotypical kids, and neurotypical adults, and kids with autism, and kids with Fragile X. I work with them a lot. Whatever it is, like this part is necessary and the most necessary part. Okay. The other stuff is more just in service of that. Like you have to try to change the way you're thinking in some ways often to pump yourself up to do this, but not necessarily, not always, right? With a lot of the kids I work with, like I said, they are minimally verbal sometimes. So we're not really doing much cognitive restructuring. We're really just trying to get to this a lot quicker. Okay. And I'll explain how we do that in a little bit, but the goal, we're not jumping, we're not throwing a kid in the pool at all. Because again, I think this can be controversial. Sometimes people are saying you're forcing a kid to do things they don't want to do. Never. I just want to emphasize we're never forcing anybody to do anything. Through reinforcement, through rewards, we try to incentivize people to do things that are hard for them at their own pace when they are ready. So again, you're not throwing someone in the pool, you're saying, okay, stick your toe in. And when you feel comfortable, when it feels warmer, then stick your whole foot in. And when that feels comfortable, stick your leg in. Go at your own pace, go at the pace at which you're comfortable. But ultimately, we do have to learn to confront the things that are hard for us. Not all the things, but the things that are important.
Yeah,
Okay.
I remember watching a show very similar. It's a show called Picky Eaters, where these people were only eating certain types of food, and gradually, as you see the psychology of the oh, Lauren, you're muted. Sorry.
Oh no, keep going. No, I was telling my
No.
daughter she had to get in my shower. My oldest.
Oh, okay. I thought you were trying. I thought so with the show Picky Eaters, you'd have these people eating one food, and they would slowly induce it until you get to a different food. Like they like potatoes. How about sweet potatoes? And you slowly, gradually increase that fear until eventually
Mhm.
they're eating like kale or something,
That is
or
such
not
a
eating.
great example.
I just remember it vividly. And
Mhm.
they had several episodes where like instead of having this much maple syrup, you would have this much, and then eventually you replace it with yogurt, and eventually
Mhm.
you replace that yogurt with sour cream, or you until eventually it's like, and a lot of the time with gradual exposure, well, especially with adults and kids, it's different. They might not want to do it at all, but with adults, they know they want to do it. They can still kick and scream and say, "I don't want to do it now."
For sure.
But
For
sometimes you
sure.
have to force them to do it if it's for the best.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, no one wants to do it. This is a tough sell, right? I don't want to do it. None of us
Yeah.
want to do it. That's why do you think I have a cockroach phobia? I'm not going for treatment for that because I know what I have to do and I'm not willing to, right? I'm
Yeah.
not willing to face everything. And
You
that's
gotta
okay,
you
right?
gotta pick and choose your battles. What's gonna affect you
Exactly.
in your daily life versus what's something that can easily be avoided. And unless you're diving in
Mhm.
cockroaches every day, you're probably fine.
Right. I'm like, I am not willing to face that one. Exactly. So I think that's such a great point. I'm gonna just address relaxation quickly. Again, that's more something else we do in the service of facing your fears. Some kids and adults really benefit from relaxation. Me personally, not so much. But I've a lot of the kids I work with, it doesn't really do anything for them. But some of them, deep breathing or progressive muscle relaxation really, really can help a lot. But again, I think the interesting thing is we've done some research with my colleagues, and when you survey clinicians across the country, school psychologists, clinical psychologists, a variety of professionals, the thing they're doing the most to treat anxiety is relaxation. And the thing they're not doing so much is exposure. So that needs to be reversed, right? The most important thing is the exposure. I think that's what people are afraid to do because, again, it's a tough sell. But the reality is, you could take all the deep breaths in the world and it's not going to change,
Yeah.
right? Unless we face our fears. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. And definitely
Mhm.
someone with it this will never work with someone with ADHD or they're thinking too much or something because eventually for a lot of people who can sit
Right.
still, this is great. But then for others, like even my mom, she's like, I don't want to do this relaxing thing. I have 15 things to do. This is the last thing I want to do. I don't care.
Exactly.
Or something like me. Like I tried meditation. I can't do it. I'm like, this is a waste
Mhm.
of my time. For
Yeah,
some kids, it's great. Like if you have
for
time to
sure.
waste, that's good. But if for some others who are like, I gotta get this, and done, it's not gonna
Mhm.
do anything. And once you force it upon them, they're just gonna resent it and not do it.
Absolutely. I mean, there are some kids who this helps tremendously, for sure.
Mhm.
And then there's other children who it has the reverse effect. They can become very obsessed with, am I breathing right? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it slow? So it can have the, you
Or
know,
yeah, or
Right.
the
And
getting
I
reverse
could say
impact of making
my
them moving.
husband is
Mhm.
like he has all this meditation. He can do this beautifully, and he's like trying to have us
Him
do it with him. And my
I know, him
son and
too.
I just can't seem to do it, but it still works for him. So I think
Yep,
it's a
yeah.
balance of what is going to work. Um,
exactly.
we have done the slow breath, like the in and out,
Mhm.
and sometimes Ryan, like you and I will do that. Like if we're like really feeling like like out of our skin, like we'll be like, let's listen to
Mhm.
our pulse. Let's like, so we are doing some of it. It's just that we haven't reached the point of yogi meditation.
I
Right,
feel
right,
like
My
right.
there's certain
husband is
people,
doing.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it gets to a point as well as not being overcomplicated, but also just hating it. I've gotten to a point where if I start thinking this is not fun, I never want to do it. I start dreading it. I'm not gonna do it. Because it like a lot because especially for me I remember doing this and I would hate doing it to a point where I just wouldn't do it and then dad would get mad like why aren't you doing this. I'm like I hate doing it, it's a waste of my time. I
Yeah,
have things I need
yeah.
to do. That's and I could see
Marsha, did you
definitely
have your hand? Oh.
Yeah, I was gonna ask a couple, got some good comments coming in the chat box, and
Mm-hmm.
Shelley or Sherry, I relate to you. I have a nonverbal autistic son, and I'm kind of like Lauren. So what if you have a child who some of this might not work for? They're not cognitively there. I mean, can you give kind of a second tier
100%.
example?
Yes. Yeah.
oh,
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm getting there.
You're getting there. Okay.
I
Let
could
me
give could
first,
I
I'm
give
just
it
going to say the ways we modify this for kids with autism in general, and then I'm going to talk about kids with ID who are nonverbal.
I could also give an example
Sure.
whenever you want, but I think sometimes
Mhm.
definitely is just what relaxes the kid is probably the best option because that will de-stress him very quickly. And
Mhm.
some people say that's pulling off the anxiety, but sometimes that's the best you can do. But see what they're interested in, getting them out of the situation, but or having like a reward, just either incentivizing them or slowly reducing the amount of that stimuli. If it's stimulation, if it's something, it's just about what makes them have fun, what makes them not anxious. You look at that, and if you're a parent, you probably will know this. You're like, oh, let them do more of this, you know?
Right.
And that most of the time will help, and especially if they're nonverbal. You just see what they're great at, and you sort of go with that.
Yeah, I think that's great. The main, I'll just say, I'll try to go this is super quick. The main modifications, I mean, we do all the same ingredients I just talked about for kids on the spectrum. The main differences, I would say, or modifications, are that we try to make everything a lot more concrete and structured and visual. So a lot more lists, a lot more social stories, a lot more visual schedules. I just try to make it a lot as concrete as possible. When you're treating anxiety in a neurotypical kid, a lot of the time you're working with the kid alone. When you're working with kids on the spectrum, for the most part, I would say their parents should be involved all the time. They should either be part of all the sessions or part of them or most of them, you know, to whatever extent you can. They have to be learning all the skills to help coach their kids at home through this. And the other big thing.
Another thing is definitely fidgets. Use fidgets, definitely. That will help. I remember plenty of times when I get stressed and I have like something to grab onto, I'm good. And such something, anything. Literally, it could be a coin. My mom used to give me coins when I'm bored for like, if I'm sitting in church and mom just gives me a coin, something to do. It's just anything for your brain to focus on, because once your brain doesn't have anything to focus on, that's when true anxiety and fear starts to kick in. That's when the worst will happen. So if you have anything distraction, then it will reduce that anxiety.
Absolutely.
One more question, Lauren. Sorry, somebody was just talking about if I make him do it, he's going to throw a temper. And I know what you're going to probably say to that, but what advice would you give to that person?
Yeah, so definitely do not make anybody do anything. That's going to make people more anxious. We're incentivizing or encouraging through reinforcement. And I know usually parents will say, or teachers will say, I've tried rewards, they don't work. And that's because you're not trying the right thing. And it does take a lot of trial and error, because like you have to bring out the big guns, right? Like an M&M is not going to cut it. Like you have to go for the biggest rewards possible to overcome or compete with that anxiety, right? There is no greater reinforcer in life than escaping the thing that makes you anxious. Nothing, right? Not literally nothing. So it can be really hard sometimes to find the thing that's going to help with that, right? And that's where, in some ways, kids on the spectrum can sometimes, in my experience, be a little bit easier than neurotypical kids, because they have what we call special interests. That's my third bullet point here, meaning that they often have these really intense passions or interests, which can really be helpful in terms of overcoming the anxiety. And that is actually, you know, maybe I'll skip to that then. I'll come back to this if I can. I'll skip over to it. But really trying to, let me just actually skip to that. So pairing the thing that they love most often with the exposure. I probably wouldn't do this for a neurotypical kid, and this wouldn't necessarily even be my go-to for all kids on the spectrum, but definitely with the kids I work with who are nonverbal or minimally verbal and have a lot of severe aggression and self-injury. It's not like we're just putting them in a situation that makes them anxious. That would be crazy, right? So we try to pair it with the most high power reinforcer we could think of. So like the example I use a lot, one of the first times I did this like about 20 years ago where it was effective was this child I worked with Fragile X syndrome and autism. He had a really, really, really severe fear of the doctor, but he had seizures. So he had to go get blood tests like every week for the meds he was on. And each time it would take 6 doctors and nurses to hold him down, which only, of course, makes you more afraid and traumatized, right? If you're afraid of the doctor. So we really tried to brainstorm, and they tried using a lot of rewards and reinforcers, and none of them really worked. And so through brainstorming, we talked about like what was the strongest special interest he ever had. And mom talked about Potato Head. He was obsessed with Potato Head. So I said, could we bring Potato Head back? Because she had eliminated Potato Head because he was so obsessed with it, he couldn't focus on anything else. And it became such a source of other difficulties, I guess. But we agreed to bring Potato Head back and leave him just at the doctor's office. Like he would live at the doctor's office, not in the rest of their life. So we explained to him, like, when you go to the doctor, you're going to see Potato Head. And he hadn't seen Potato Head in like 2 years. So when he got to the doctor, he was really, really excited to see Potato Head. We didn't do anything that first time. We just paired Potato Head with the doctor's office. So he created this new kind of positive association, right? No blood tests, no physical exams, no nothing, right? And then the second time he came, we just said, okay, if you want Potato Head, get on the examining table. And then he got on the examining table to get Potato Head, and we didn't do anything, right? Third time we did a little bit more, right? So each, like looking in the ears or whatever. And by the fourth or fifth time, maybe we were doing the blood test. And he didn't even care because he was so excited to be holding Potato Head. So once you hit upon that thing, often it can be a little bit easier sometimes for kids on the spectrum because there are things sometimes that they love so much. The other example I have here is the Sneetches. A kid I worked with was afraid of left and right turns when his parents were driving in the car. So his parents had really altered their driving route to go straight as much as possible. And so to minimize, left and right turns, because he would bang his head in the window or pull their hair or cry and tantrum, get really, really distressed every time they made a left or right turn. So his favorite thing was Dr. Seuss, and in particular the Sneetches, and the foot book were his two favorites. So, the foot book, like left foot, right foot, right. So we made like a whole story, like left turn, right turn, right, turns in the morning, turns at night. And I made a recording of myself reading those stories, and he got to listen to those in the car. And again, it just seemed to overpower or overcome his anxiety. Again, will that work with every kid completely? No, definitely for some kids that are going to still be anxious, but at least it'll mitigate it or lessen it. I'm not saying it's always going to eliminate it, but it can definitely help to really take the edge off, if you will. Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of similar. A lot of brains all sort of work the same. Think about like a dog going to the vet. He doesn't know he's going to the vet. He just sees car. Most of the time, car means he's going to go see someone. So he's excited to go in the car. If he knew car equals vet, he wouldn't go in the car. You just gotta, it's sort of that pairing. And like,
exactly, trying to create a
yeah.
new association.
And and a person's brain's more complex, but it's just about hiding those. Like, oh, everything, this iPad means I did good. I get to have iPad or something. It's just more about like, if your kid passes a test, you give them a big party. Something like that, you can't always give them a big party because then it won't do anything,
Absolutely.
So I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so what if my daughter has where it's almost like her anxiety stems from a person. Like she just gets so excited about that person. I mean, so she's constantly, I don't know, obsessing about that person. So, or events, whatever's coming next. So is that how do you, it almost seems like when you're saying take away the potato head, I try to take away that she can't see this person. But it is like her.
Yeah, that's really common. That's really common. And especially because, so what I noticed, assessing anxiety is really hard in kids with autism, right? Especially when they're nonverbal. I discovered that about 20 years ago when I was trying to come up with an weeks. And what I realized is I couldn't tell the difference between excitement and anxiety. When I didn't know them, because physiologically, when I know the kids, I can, but when I didn't know them, I couldn't, right? Because physiologically, they actually are really similar and really the same. So a lot of the time when kids are really excited about something, like you said, to see a particular person, or to do a particular activity, that excitement and the anxiety are really, really joined, and they can be almost anxious about when's it going to happen, when's it going to start, when am I going to get to do this, right? That is a really common issue.
Yeah,
And I think,
I was also gonna add. I mean, it's since sometimes anxiety, I very similar see it to like an addiction. And when you're done smoking, for example, you have nicotine package, nicotine gum. I don't not for everything, but I think for some things you can have that sort of nicotine gum equivalent to maybe instead of Mr. Potato Head, you have Miss Potato Head. It's not as good to him, but it's similar enough. It's sort of like maybe it's not the same person, but similar enough that I like them. Like maybe this person likes dad more than mom, but they still like mom. So you give them more mom. It's sort of that addiction. You got to think of it. I've learned that sometimes thinking about the brains and steps of like, this doesn't work, this works. If this doesn't work, this works. It's sort of like, it's sort of how you treat an addiction. So if you think very similarly about it, then, and for not for every situation, it's not going to work because some of them are so complex. There's no replacement,
And
No, absolutely.
I'm taking the floor again. One more question, Ryan, while you were speaking also, because I know previously I had heard you speak and you said something that stuck with me, but I didn't get to watch the whole thing. And maybe you guys will address this, but where you said something where you have to talk to yourself, and maybe that's coming up later on in the talk where
Oh, I still do that to this day.
so
She's
for
so
example,
wrong.
so
I'm
since
gonna
I
switch
learned
rooms. Sorry.
so
My
since
dog's
I
crying.
learned that little tiny bit from you, I've been trying to use it with her. Like she'll say, "What should I say to my brain? What should I say to my brain?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's your brain. What, calm down,
Mm.
So do you have any advice on that?
I think the best advice basically is to think about it as like it depends. It depends. For if it's autism, very logically. Tell her to think about this situation very logically, like it's a science problem. It's an experiment with step-by-step steps of what's going to happen. I'm going to eat this thing, then I'm going to study it 2 to 3. Then from 3 to 4, I'm going to exercise. It's just sort of that step by step. When you sort of put your brain into that motion, especially with autism, it really calms you down. Like I know for example with my autism, it really helps to have that scheduling, to have that self-talk, and to go over all the possibilities. You just have to pretty much think about it like you would any type of math problem or any logic thing. Very particular in steps.
Okay, I never thought of it like that. So I have to give her more steps. Maybe that's what she's asking
Give her
for.
you gotta be as specific as you think. Doesn't matter how stupid you may think it is to give her like very specific. Like it depends on how much, not how, you know what I'm saying? It's hard to describe it, but like depending on how much autism affects her, sometimes you got to give super specific steps to a point where you feel like I don't need to be saying this, but maybe for them you do. It's not simple to
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I'm
no,
sure.
that's interesting because I never thought of it like that. So I appreciate it because you're right. Like she'll ask me, what time are we going? But maybe she needs, I need you to get dressed at this time. We need to do this,
I've,
like
I've
you're
had,
saying it, like make it step by step.
Yeah.
oh
Because
no,
that's
I
how
do
she
that with
normally
them.
gets everything else in life, right? Step by step, that until you get comfortable with it.
Oh
So,
no, I've had to do that with my mom a couple times, and I get annoyed with her, and I'm like, "When are we leaving?" She says 6:30. It's 6:30. I'm like, "Are we leaving now?" It's sort of like you need like a set schedule. I mean, we used to do this over the summer when I didn't have
Mhm.
school. Mom,
Right.
she wants to cut in.
No, I would say that, yeah, but we were able to like pull back,
Pull
should I
back
say,
as age, but like when I was
yeah.
younger, even
Yeah, like it
today,
used to be
mom schedules
very
everything.
explicit, very
Mhm.
explicit lists, and then I would write it down and he'd carry it with him. And then eventually he started to do it on his own and could set his own schedule. But like in the beginning, it was like we had to use like some of these things, Lauren, that you have with the visual schedules and very precise, etc. And then as he got older, it was like, okay, like he can pick the pictures for the visual. And then
Mhm.
like how do you get him to do it so it's not just me saying, okay, at 8
Exactly.
o'clock you're going to do this, at 10 o'clock you're going to do this, etc.
Right.
That
And
took a
yeah,
while.
yeah, even in it, and that took most of my life in order to do that. And some people may never reach that step, but some people may. It really depends. Because like some people are able to reach that and some people it's much harder to do it. So I
Yeah.
definitely do think that as you sort of have to gauge it, and I think that parents can do this better than any professional can, especially because they understand their kid.
Right.
Once you understand, it's really hard. A professional can know the strategies, but knowing the ins and out of your kid is really hard. A parent can know what that kid needs and
Mhm.
know exactly what makes him tick.
Yeah.
Is if you bring that to your professional and tell them, hey, these are the things they like, and be prepared, you'll make it so much easier for that to be addressed. And if they know it, they can fully do their job.
Absolutely. The one thing I just wanted to add in response to what you were talking about before with your daughter and the excitement and the anxiety is like, so a big thing that is a bit unique to kids with autism. I mean, all kids like predictability and consistency, but the biggest difference is one of the main sources of anxiety for people on the spectrum is unpredictability, transitions from home to school, transitions from one activity to another, one thing ending, another thing beginning. Those are really,
Oh,
really hard. And the anticipation of not knowing when something's going to happen, which is why the most helpful kind of prevention strategy we always do is really, like you said, not just setting steps, but really coming up with a visual schedule, especially during summertime when school's out of session
yeah.
and really
the transition, especially for me, was hard going to college and all that, having to transition and change schedule. It's annoying and I hate it. I hate it to this day. I hate changing schedules. It's not as bad as it used to be, but I think like you have to do that gradual exposure, like she was talking about it, like especially for something big like college, being slowly getting accustomed to staying a couple days on campus. Then eventually you have to up it because you got to get used to it slowly over time.
Mhm.
You can't just jump in the deep end. Like with anything, like it's the same reason why smokers can't just quit smoking and then suddenly they're fine. There's a lot of drawbacks and they suddenly get back on it like that.
Yeah.
It's it's addiction. It's sort of like it's weird to say, but a lot of it is very similar to like addiction of that thing because your fear is a powerful thing and it's meant to be a powerful thing, but sometimes you don't need it, but it still wants to stick around. Like a tenant in a house who you want to leave but will never leave.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think the only other thing I'll say here is it's really important to structure things with visual schedules and to schedule things. So I'm thinking of a kid when I was working the inpatient unit Bellevue with autism who they canceled the roof party and he was crying, when's the roof party? When's the roof party? And they just kept yelling at him, no roof party, no roof party, which obviously was making everything worse and led to a total meltdown. And instead, what you should do in a situation like that is to say, the roof parties are scheduled for this day and put it on the calendar. So again, there just has to be some sort of structure and knowing when it's going to happen. That usually is really helpful for kids. And then over time, we can work on building in question marks. Like if you see, I put question marks here in the schedules, like work on building in unpredictability, work on building in, we don't know what's going to happen here, but you at least first have to start out with that base of structure and predictability and previewing things, right? Visually is a really, really helpful strategy to combating that kind of anxiety.
Thank you.
The only other I skipped over a few things. I think I'm just seeing if I have time to go back here. The
Can you do
modification.
the choices, Lauren? I always found that was something that I struggled with as a parent, was it, especially with the beginning of autism when he really wasn't very verbal. It was so much easier for me just to do so much. And then when he would get frustrated and he again didn't have the words, and now you can see he has lots of words, but
Yeah.
he didn't at the time, and he would just get so frustrated. And later on I realized, well, because I was like saying you have to put your pants on first, so you have to do, like, I was controlling so much of what he was doing that
Yeah.
I think wasn't helping with anxiety down the road, because I just made that as he got older I would do even more of that versus like letting him have choices of what is he want to do and stepping back and having him make
100%.
mistakes, which is really anxiety for me.
It is. It really is. You're so right. And I mean, I think so, but that's a point I always try to make to like parents and teachers is that, it's kind of sucks to be a kid in general because you have no choice or control. Like I talk to my college students about this. I'm like, I marvel at like how they just get up and leave the room and like don't come back sometimes. Are they going to the bathroom? And I don't know, maybe. But like I look at my daughter who's 10, she has to ask for permission to go to the bathroom in school and to get up and go to the bathroom, right? And sometimes they say no. You have so little control as a kid. But people with autism, kids with autism, they have even less control. Tons of studies have shown that they have so little autonomy and control over what they get to do in their lives. That's anxiety provoking, right? That is super anxiety provoking to not have any sense of controllability, right? So any kind of agency or control we can give in any situation is going to be helpful and anxiety inducing. And just to be clear, I don't usually mean give a choice about whether to do something or not, or that can be an option, but more to give a choice over how to do something. So like you have to go to the doctor's office, you have to, right? But choices, we do this a lot at doctor's offices, choices like, do you want them to look in your left or your right ear first? Do you want them to take your temperature or blood pressure first? And again, no strategy works for all kids. There's some kids who choices are going to make them more anxious. For me, I hate making choices. I just want someone around full time to make all my choices for me. But for most kids, that's really going to help them to have some kind of control over what happens when, in what order, how, right? Yeah, does that make sense? Or
Yeah.
so again, that's like a big, piece of what we're trying to do in most anxiety provoking situations is inject some kind of choice or control into it, right?
And
Yeah,
I like these
Marcia.
examples that you have there where you have you have visuals on like, if I do this, this will happen, and like that if then, and then also just being able to make choices starting at a young, or if someone doesn't have as much verbal, that they still can make choices.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The only other thing I just want to make sure I say before, well, I guess I actually do want to say this. Molly and I were talking about this earlier today. I think when I used to give parent presentations years ago, sometimes parents would raise their hand in the audience and be like, so my kid's afraid of bikes. Are you saying like that I should make them go on a bike? No, that's definitely not what I'm saying. So I want to make that really clear. Not all fears need to be faced. Like, especially, again, I know myself as a parent, like there are 30 million fears and battles and things to deal with every day. You can't fight them all. Not every hill's a hill you want to die on, right? Like you gotta prioritize. Because I think, a lot of the time there's a lot of autistic consultants I work with who will say, why do you have to do exposures in that situation? Like to thunder, for example, a kid I work with where we did with thunder or fire alarms. There's like, can't you just have them wear headphones? And maybe you can, in general, my approach is usually trying to face your fears, but like for a lot of things, if accommodating is going to work or if avoiding it's going to work, fine. That's okay. We don't all have to do everything, right? And so I think focusing on what are the fears that are really impacting your quality of life or your family's quality of life? Those are the fears that are important to face, right? Like I said, I don't need to treat my fear of cockroaches. But one of my girls with autism, her fear of spiders got so bad that when she saw a spider in the bathroom at school, she started having accidents again in class because she avoided the bathroom. That's really impairing, right? So that we need to treat, right? But
Yeah.
that's the point I really wanted to make, that you really have to think about, is this impairing your quality of life?
Well,
And
yeah, I want to agree with this. And so also about, especially when the kids get older, about how much necessary is that for live? I mean, my parents were fighting about me using the dining hall all the time. They're like, go to the dining hall, please go to the dining hall, please. And I'm like, no, to a point, and because I'd rather save my energy for something else. It's the point is that
that makes sense.
the best type of anxieties to face are ones that are necessary for you to live. You can't be afraid of the sun, but you can be afraid of the sea. Like the sea you can be afraid of because it's not like you're in direct contact with that every day.
Right.
Unless you choose to do that, which in that
I
case,
am afraid of the ocean. I agree with you there. I agree. I don't have to confront that fear of
you
the
don't
ocean.
have to confront certain fears if you think it's not realistically going to happen. Like, I don't like bugs crawling on me. I'm not afraid of bugs. I don't like them touching me. I'm like, that's something I don't want to deal with because I don't think that will ever stop. It's just being realistic about what they're going to actually have to thing. Especially being a parent, I would assume you would probably know, hey, I can't fight my kid about what he's doing here, but I'm sure going to fight here because this is important that he can't do that. And just address the same thing with anxiety. Just address the same thing with anxiety. Anxiety is similarly enough is a person you got to fight with, and you got to realize he's going to have some quirks you don't like. But if he just starts shaving like right in front of you, maybe that's when you tell him to stop doing that. Versus him, he burps too loudly one day. Like, you can't be mad for that, but you can be mad that he doesn't wash the dishes ever. That's a reasonable thing to be mad at. It's that type of thing. You have to just pick and choose your battles. It's all about picking and choosing. It's like, because there's a certain point where that the fight's gonna be so hard that it won't mean anything. Like, my mother is afraid of roller coasters. She hates them. She's never gonna go over that fear, and I'm forcing her to do it, and she hates me for it. And we're like, oh, and she's never gonna face that fear because she doesn't need to.
Absolutely. I stand by that as well. Yeah, Marcia, did you have a question?
So yeah, I had more of a comment that I love that people are sharing their personal experiences, and I hope that you know that many people on this call can relate to what you're talking about, your trauma and what happens on day to day, whoever your child is. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And I'm also hearing that a lot of emotional stress came into the picture with COVID on top of the disability. And that's
100%.
they're talking about that. And then I was just curious, one was talking about transitions, and we all know that I know a lot of us have kids on the spectrum, not all of us, but I know that it's difficult for them typically. And do you have any resource or any slide or any information about how to help them deal with transitions, because they're really debilitating this child?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, transitions are the main, probably the top problem I deal with, I would say. Yeah, absolutely. And so like we have to make things more predictable, right? We have to make visual schedules to help with the transition. Timers help with the transition, countdowns, different types for each kid. Like for my own kids, I use the time timer where you see the red running out, or the time tracker with the green, yellow, red. For some kids, timers make them more anxious. I would say 80-90% timers help. There's a small percentage where timers will make them more anxious,
I
but
do not like timers, so
yeah, there we
no,
go.
and
You're
definitely, and I think
Mhm.
definitely, I use this in my daily life, having to constantly change my schedule. Like I thought I was gonna have enough time to do homework before this meeting, but I'm like, I gotta fit in my exercise, I gotta fit in this, I gotta fit in that,
Mhm.
and you realize I can't fit it in, and
Right,
you gotta just accept the fact that you can't fit it in, because you
right.
start worrying about it. I remember perseverating on things.
Hmm.
It's really hard because I really want to, and I really want to proliferate on things. But
Yeah,
slowly but surely, like if you see your kid like hyper focusing on something, I think you got to help it. It's
absolutely.
transition is a hard thing. The best thing to do is the gradual exposure, because that's the best way to do it without hurting it. Doing social situations, I was gradually exposed to social situations, social situations because of the fact that it allowed me to get used to all the noise, all the stimuli, you know?
Mhm.
I literally left for a couple minutes to close the door because there was too much sound and noise. And it's
Yeah,
something I have to deal with. Whereas before, I probably would have gone out there and maybe screamed at the kids because I'm giving that reaction, and it's sort of like versus just ignoring it. You sort of
yeah,
learn over time, and teaching your kids, and even parents. I know plenty of people who still struggle with this. They
yeah,
need to learn how to deal with it in a way that's quick and painless. Quick and painless is definitely a helpful thing, because if you drag out the
absolutely.
process, it will just make your anxiety worse. It's like if you're gonna get a shot, you might as well not look while it's happening.
Yeah.
Like
Uh,
that's fine. Like
right. I think so the timers, the schedules are really, really helpful. The social stories, explaining what you're going to do, but just and another thing, I don't have it here, but I should have said this. Transition objects or transition songs can be really transition routines, we would call it. So like the cleanup song is a great example of that. That's how they came up, clean up, you know what I'm talking about, that you sing when we sing with preschoolers, because it can make the aversive activity of cleaning up less aversive when you're singing. So I sing with everything with my kids. There's songs for every kind of transition, or with some kids, it's a special object, like a special doll they maybe get to hold when they're transitioning from one place to another. So we'll often use their favorite songs or their favorite snacks or their favorite CDs or their favorite whatever it is to make a transition activity, right? To make that transition go down easier, so to speak, like to make it less upsetting, to make it, again, to create a more positive association with that transition. And the other thing I would say is we do a lot of priming or previewing. So like if you know your kid's starting school, a new school, take videos of that school, have them watch videos of that school, go into the school if you can before it opens. Some, teachers are going to be really accommodating of that. The dentist, I didn't follow my own advice with my older daughter when she was 3. She had a huge meltdown at the dentist, and I thought, why didn't I do priming? And then I went out and bought all the little dental equipment and rehearsed it all with her at home and had her watch videos of it. So again, tons of rehearsing, which is gradual exposure also, but in a really, really relaxed kind of previewing rehearsal
Fun.
format. Did you say something or have a question?
No, it's just a fun way, right? It made it enjoyable for her.
Yeah,
You
there's
clean
videos
house.
of her. Yeah, there's videos of her where she was giving me a dental exam. I was giving her a dental exam, and she's sticking things in my mouth. So it helps to make it, again, much less aversive, all these new things and transitions that can be really challenging for kids.
Did we have any questions? Because we're almost getting towards the end, right? Of our webinar.
I think I've covered a lot of
Everybody?
questions. I know there was a lot of people that have had some horrifying situations with providers who couldn't help them with their child's anxiety and turned away at the end saying, good luck, hang in there, we can't do anything for you. And that
Sorry to
breaks
hear
my
that.
heart. But if anybody has any questions, I think Lauren has gone through most of her slides. Is that right, Lauren? I don't want to speak
There
for
were
you.
there were two I didn't. If I could just show really quickly, because I think
Okay, no, I don't want to cut you off. I want you to continue. So I hope if nobody else minds.
no,
I just
only if
want
but I'd rather answer questions because I think those are more helpful. But if no one has a question, I will show this if this is helpful. It's just an excerpt from one of my social stories. I don't know if you could see it, but like this is what I mean by trying to make things a lot more concrete and visual. I talked about this kid like the longer I think HCPBS presentation we did, but he was a boy who had autism and a mild intellectual disability and anxiety and OCD. And his fear was of getting sick. And his ritual was reassurance seeking, asking mom, am I sick? Am I sick? So he would ask mom, am I healthy? Am I breathing right? Is my face red? Do I look sick? Did that kid get sick? Do you think I'll catch it from him? That whole litany of questions, right? And mom, answered him as I would. And even despite all I know, I still fall into that trap myself because it's really hard as a parent not to try to just make your kid feel better. It's the hardest thing. So mom would answer him and say, you're healthy. No, you're not going to get sick, right? So we had to explain to him, and we explained it through a social story, that from now on, he's not gonna ask those questions anymore. And when he asked them, she's not going to answer them. And again, like the visual cross out was just really helpful for him. This is kind of what I mean by making it very visual and concrete. Because I remember he's like, I asked those questions. Am I healthy? Am I sick? I'm like, yeah, I wrote this story about you. And he's like, but it's crossed out. I'm like, right. He's like, that means I can't ask it. I'm like, right. That means you can't ask it. Right. And he's like, but why is it crossed out? Mom saying, yes, you're healthy. I'm like, because moms can't say that to you anymore because it's going to make you more anxious. And so he understood, the cross that he would say all the time. He would start to ask it like, I'm anxious. He'd be like, oh, well, that's crossed out. I can't ask it. It's crossed out. So that really helped him to kind of give him a new rule, right? And instead we named his anxiety the Undertaker, who was, I think, a WWF character. He loved WWF. And when he would ask mom, again, naming it helped mom align with him. So she wasn't just ignoring him when he asked that, but she would say, oh, that's an Undertaker question, so I can't answer that because we got to fight the Undertaker, right? So that really helped him understand that she wasn't against him, but she's trying to help him fight this bad guy, right? If that makes sense.
There's a certain book I remember. It was called Superflex, and it was
Yeah.
using these visual stories. And I remember
Great.
using this, and it's like it was such a great series because I still remember it. So it probably means I remember well. And it's like going over these like super villains, but they're all the different types of rock brain, all that stuff like that. Being able to relate them in stories, especially if you're creative with your kids, be like, so what you're talking about is actually this guy. This guy's doing that. Do you want to listen to this guy? He's mean and stinky. You don't want to be like him.
Yeah.
It's sort of like just making sure that they know, sort of like, especially for younger kids, and sort of instilling them. It can work for older ones, but it can basically be like, listen, it's very similar to this guy. Do you really want to act like this guy? No. Then you shouldn't.
Absolutely, sweetie. Absolutely. And I think people were asking about resources. So I just wanted to say in the slides I attached, can I love you? They have resources here. So like facing your fears. I think they might have virtual groups. They run groups for autistic teens and adolescents. I think some younger kids too, but so they're in Colorado, Judy and Audrey, they're my colleagues, but I do think they run some virtual groups, so that can be a good resource. But they publish their book as well, so you can buy it. I think on my book slide I have it. Do I not have a book slide? Oh, kidding. But if you go to that site too, we'll direct you to the book you can buy too. And I can definitely send people books or other recommendations if they need those. But these are some, I think, good websites to go to that can be helpful. And I'm happy to stay after and answer any questions that people have.
I think the last couple questions or comments, Lauren, are just people that their situation, they're feeling helpless and they're not sure where to turn. And at one her daughter sounds negative talk and kind of thoughts that go to a dark space, and very similar to my youngest son. And I mentioned to her that I did CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, with him, and it really, really helped. I mean, extreme change from where he was at 10 to when he turned 18 and went away to college, which I never thought would be a reality. So is there like a national website or any
for CBT?
or for those just anxiety in general? I mean, obviously they providers in their area, but it's hard
well,
because they're all around the country and you're
they
in New
are.
York.
It is hard. It is hard. I'm not gonna lie there. There aren't very many. It is tough because there's like the whole psychology world and CBT, and a lot of the time they don't see kids with autism, especially those with ID. And then there's all the ABA folks, all the BCBAs who are like, yeah, we work with kids with autism, but we don't treat anxiety. So often, yeah, there's a huge hole, which is what a lot of us are trying to fix. Like right now, we've been trying to train mental health providers in New York State, like social workers and mental health counselors who normally do CBT with neurotypical kids, to also start seeing kids with autism. So that's like a big push. We've been trying to get more providers out there feeling trained to do that. But I agree with you. There's not a lot of resources out there. It's been hard to find providers for my own kids, honestly. It's not easy out there, so I empathize with that. And in no way am I meaning also to make any of these strategies sound easy, because they're not. Like I said, I think when I was pregnant with my first daughter, I was like, oh, I'll be good at this. I know ABA, I'm a clinical psychologist. And like, I was not prepared for how much I would feel like I suck all the time, really, and how hard it is, and how I fall into so many of the same traps I used to help families with in terms of accommodating and rescuing. And it's just really hard when your emotions are involved sometimes. And so I empathize. I'm right there with all the emotions all of you are feeling. I'm going through it myself with my own kids. It's really tough. It's much easier with your clients than when you're going through the stuff with your own children. It's really, really hard.
Well, I'm gonna wrap it up because we're a few minutes over, and if we don't have any more questions, I think it's time to. I thank you for taking a little bit of time to answer some.
Yeah.
Thank you everybody for being with us today and for sharing. Ryan and Lauren and Laura, thank you so much for all of your tips and advice and stories and experience. It was awesome. Thank you. Thank you. We will send out in a couple of days, probably the actual recording again, if you guys want it, or it will be available, the slides, etc. So thank you all for attending. And if you have any ideas of what you might want to have us chat about as a family chat in the future, please send us an email. Thank you to all the panelists. Marcia, thank you so much for handling things. Molly and everybody, and Lauren, thank you again for everything you've done. There's an article in the magazine to check that out. And Ryan, thank you for being here. Really appreciate your sharing your personal experiences. That was great. Really enjoyed that. Laura, thank you for being here as well. All right, thank you everybody. Have a great night, and we will see you next time. Talk to you soon. Bye.